Hey guys, welcome back to another journey through the quieter corners of history. Tonight we're going to explore something that might seem strange to our modern eyes, a beauty practice that was once considered the height of elegance and refinement. Picture, if you will, a time when women would carefully pluck away their hairlines, sometimes removing every strand from their foreheads, creating an appearance that would puzzle us today. This is the story of medieval beauty, of painful mourning rituals, and of the curious ways that fashion can shape not just how we look, but who we are. It's a tale that winds through castle chambers and cathedral art, through the private letters of noble ladies, and the careful observations of chroniclers who documented their world. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are settling in, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love knowing that somewhere, someone in Tokyo is drifting off to tales of ancient scams, while someone else in Minneapolis is just starting their day with stories of historical foolishness. Now dim the lights, settle deep in your pillow tonight. Let your breathing deeply of your clean modern air, let your muscles release their tension, let your mind begin to wander. Let the past rise softly around you, like distant smoke on the steps. As you settle into comfort, imagine yourself stepping back through the centuries, into a world where beauty meant something entirely different than it does today. Where the width of your forehead could signal your virtue, your intelligence, even your worthiness to marry. Where women would endure considerable pain each morning, not for vanity alone, but for survival in a society that judged them by the curve of their brow. Tonight, we'll walk beside these medieval women, understanding their choices, their struggles, and the surprising ways their ancient beauty rituals connect to our own modern relationship with appearance and identity. Let the rhythm of their daily lives wash over you, as we discover why medieval women willingly transformed their faces in ways that seem so foreign to us now. The first pale light of dawn creeps through the narrow window of your chamber, casting long shadows across the stone floor. You are a lady of the court, perhaps the daughter of a minor baron, or the wife of a wealthy merchant who has earned his way into noble circles. Your day begins, as it always does, with the careful construction of your appearance, a ritual that will take the better part of 2 hours. Your serving woman, Agnes, approaches with the basin of warm water, scented with rose petals and herbs. The water steams gently in the cool morning air, and you can smell the faint sweetness of the oils she has added. But this is not merely for cleansing. This is preparation for a process that you both dread and accept as necessary. Agnes sets out the tools of your transformation. A small sharp knife with a handle of polished bone, tweezers crafted by the finest metalworkers, and a collection of little pots containing various concoctions, some purchased from traveling merchants, others prepared by the castle's herbalist according to recipes passed down through generations of women. You settle yourself before the polished metal mirror, its surface reflecting your face in wavering, imperfect detail. The mirror itself is a luxury. Most women of lesser means make do with still water in a bowl or rely entirely on the judgment of others. But you need to see clearly, for the work ahead requires precision. Your forehead, as nature made it, extends perhaps 3 fingers' width above your eyebrows. This will not do. Fashion demands that you create a dome of pale skin, stretching from your temples to the crown of your head. A smooth, unbroken expanse that speaks of intellect, purity, and noble breeding. The poets sing of foreheads like white marble, like the curved dome of a chapel, like the moon in its fullness. Agnes begins with the knife, carefully scraping away the fine hairs that have grown along your hairline since yesterday's grooming. The blade is sharp, and she works with practiced skill, but you still feel the occasional sting as it catches against your skin. The scraping sound is soft but persistent, a rhythmic whisper that accompanies the slow lightening of the sky outside your window. Where the knife cannot reach, the tweezers take over. Agnes works methodically, plucking each hair with a small, sharp tug. You have learned to breathe deeply during this process, to let your mind drift to other things. The music you will hear at today's feast, the letter you must write to your sister, the fabric that arrived yesterday from Flanders and waits to be made into a new gown. The pain is constant but manageable, like a series of tiny bee stings. You have been enduring this since you were 12 years old, when your mother first declared you old enough to be seen at court. The pain has become familiar, even comforting in its predictability. Each small hurt is a step toward the ideal, toward the person you must become to survive and thrive in your world. Agnes pauses to examine her work, tilting your head toward the window to catch the morning light. She spots a few missed hairs and returns to her careful plucking. Your forehead gradually being revealed shows the pale skin that rarely sees sunlight, a mark of your station, proof that you do not labor in the fields or walk unprotected under the sun. But the physical transformation is only the beginning. From one of her pots, Agnes takes a pale, thick paste made from ground pearls, eggshells, and lead. This she applies to your newly exposed forehead, working it into the skin with gentle circular motions. The mixture is designed to whiten and smooth, to create that perfect luminous dome that fashion demands. The lead tingles against your skin, a sensation that your mother assured you was proof of the mixture's efficacy. You do not know, cannot know, that this daily application is slowly poisoning you, that the very substance meant to enhance your beauty is leaching into your blood, affecting your thoughts and moods in ways both subtle and profound. This knowledge belongs to a future that will not arrive for centuries. Over the whitening paste, Agnes dusts a powder made from crushed lily petals and rice flour. This final layer catches the light beautifully, creating an almost ethereal glow. Your forehead now extends a full hand's width above your eyebrows, creating the proportions that mark you as a woman of breeding and refinement. You examine yourself in the mirror, turning your head from side to side to ensure the effect is even. The face looking back at you is the one your world expects to see, elongated, pale, with that distinctive high forehead that speaks of intelligence and nobility. You have successfully erased the natural line where your hair meets your skin, creating instead a blank canvas upon which society can project its ideals. But the ritual is not yet complete. Agnes brings forward a small bottle of liquid that smells of vinegar and herbs. This is applied to your eyebrows, which must also be modified. The fashion demands that your brows be nearly invisible, mere suggestions of hair that do not compete with the vast expanse of your forehead. Some women pluck their eyebrows entirely, but you have chosen a middle path, thinning them to almost nothing, leaving just enough to frame your eyes. The vinegar solution burns slightly as it touches the tender skin around your eyes, but you remain still. Agnes works quickly, using a small brush to ensure even coverage. This treatment will gradually lighten your eyebrows, making them fade into the pale background of your face. As she works, Agnes tells you the gossip from the servants' quarters. Lady Margaret, she reports, has been using a new mixture that includes ground unicorn horn, though you both know it is likely nothing more than powdered deer antler. The Duchess of Burgundy, according to the traveling merchants, has begun plucking her hairline even further back, creating a forehead so vast it resembles a polished dome. These details matter more than you might expect. In a world where a woman's worth is measured largely by her ability to attract a suitable husband, where her appearance can determine her family's political alliances, where a single flaw might be interpreted as a sign of moral weakness or poor breeding, the height of your forehead becomes a matter of survival. You think of your younger sister, still at home with your parents, still too young for this daily ritual. Part of you envies her natural hairline, her face unmarked by the demands of fashion. But another part knows that she too will soon join this sisterhood of pain, this daily commitment to an ideal that transforms not just appearance, but identity itself. The process continues as Agnes applies a final layer of powder, this one tinted with the faintest hint of rose to bring warmth to your pale skin. She steps back to examine her work, making small adjustments with a soft brush. The transformation is complete. You have become the woman your world expects to see. But even as you admire the result, you are aware of the temporary nature of this beauty. By evening, the powders will have faded, smudged by sweat and the touch of hands and lips. Tomorrow morning, the ritual will begin again. The scraping, the plucking, the careful application of substances that promise to make you more beautiful, more acceptable, more worthy of love and respect. You rise from your seat and Agnes begins the next phase of your morning transformation, The elaborate process of dressing your hair, arranging veils and headdresses that will frame and complement your newly sculpted forehead. But that is a different ritual entirely, one that will take another hour of careful work. As you wait, you run your fingers gently along your transformed hairline, feeling the smooth, tender skin that has been revealed. It is strange to touch this part of yourself that is usually hidden, to feel the vulnerability of newly exposed flesh. Your forehead, now vast and pale, feels like a blank page upon which your entire identity has been written. The morning light grows stronger, and you can hear the sounds of the castle waking. Servants hurrying through corridors, horses being prepared in the courtyard, the distant clatter of pots and pans from the kitchens. Soon you will join the public world, presenting this carefully constructed version of yourself to the court. But for now, in the quiet of your chamber, you exist in the space between your natural self and the woman you must become, suspended in the daily act of transformation that defines your existence. You close your eyes and breathe deeply, preparing yourself for the day ahead. The pain of the morning ritual fades, replaced by the familiar weight of expectation. You are ready to face the world, your forehead a testament to your dedication to the ideals of your time, your willingness to endure discomfort for the sake of beauty, status, and acceptance. This is your morning mirror ritual repeated by countless women across medieval Europe, each in her own chamber, each with her own dreams and fears, each participating in a strange and painful dance between nature and artifice, between the self as given and the self as constructed. In the rhythm of scraping and plucking, in the careful application of powders and pastes, in the slow transformation of hairline into canvas, you find both the constraints and the power of your position as a woman in a world that watches your every move, judges your every choice, and finds in the curve of your brow a reflection of your very soul. Let us now turn our attention to one woman whose forehead became the subject of chronicles, whose beauty rituals were documented by the most careful observers of her time. Her name was Isabeau of Bavaria, and she would become Queen of France, though her path to that crown would be marked by both triumph and tragedy, her appearance serving as both weapon and vulnerability in the dangerous game of medieval politics. Born in the year 1370 into the Wittelsbach dynasty of Bavaria, Isabeau Elizabeth was raised from birth to be a political asset, her beauty cultivated as carefully as a gardener tends his prize roses. Her father, Duke Stephen III of Bavaria-Ingolstadt, understood that in the chess game of European politics, a beautiful daughter could be worth more than a dozen knights or a well-fortified castle. From her earliest years, Isabeau was trained not merely in the arts of courtly life, music, dancing, embroidery, languages, but in the subtle science of appearance, the alchemical transformation that would make her face a diplomatic instrument of unprecedented power. The Bavaria of Isabeau's youth was a land of contradictions, where ancient Germanic traditions mingled uneasily with French sophistication and Italian refinement. The Wittelsbach court, seeking to establish its credentials among the great powers of Europe, had imported French tutors, Italian artists, and Byzantine craftsmen. This cultural melting pot created an environment where beauty was understood not as a simple gift of nature, but as a complex art requiring international expertise. Isabeau's childhood was thus spent in preparation for a destiny she could barely comprehend. While other children played, she sat for hours before polished mirrors, learning to evaluate her features with the cold precision of a military strategist. Her tutors taught her to see her face not as a reflection of her inner self, but as a map of political possibilities. The width of her forehead would determine the kingdom she might rule. The pallor of her skin would signal her fitness for the highest circles of nobility. The perfection of her grooming would demonstrate the sophistication of her homeland. When she arrived at the French court as a teenager, her marriage to the young King Charles VI arranged to seal an alliance between Bavaria and France. Contemporary accounts describe her as possessing the ideal beauty of her time. A forehead so high and pale it seemed to glow with inner light, eyebrows so faint they appeared to have been drawn by angels, a face that embodied every quality the medieval world associated with noble femininity. But these chroniclers, writing for posterity, could hardly capture the daily reality of creating and maintaining such perfection. Isabeau's beauty was not accidental. Like you in your morning chamber, she began each day with a ritual of transformation that would have been familiar to noble women across Europe, but elevated to an art form befitting the Queen of France. The chronicler Jean Froissart, who observed court life with the careful eye of a professional observer, left us glimpses into these private moments that shaped public perception. His writings, scattered across multiple volumes of chronicles, reveal a woman whose morning routine resembled nothing so much as a complex scientific experiment, with her body as the laboratory and her face as the hypothesis to be proven daily. Picture Isabeau in her chambers at the Louvre, the great fortress palace that served as the beating heart of French power. Her quarters occupy an entire wing of the building, a suite of rooms that rivals the apartments of many sovereign princes. The principal chamber, where her daily transformation takes place, is a marvel of medieval luxury and practicality combined. The room is warm despite the stone walls, heated by not one but 3 great fireplaces that burn constantly through the winter months, fed by a steady stream of servants carrying loads of carefully seasoned oak and aromatic herbs. Tapestries hang from every wall, depicting scenes of courtly love and noble deeds, their colors rich and deep in the morning light. These are not mere decorations, but political statements, woven by the finest craftsmen of Paris and Brussels. One shows the wedding of Isabeau and Charles, their figures idealized and glowing with divine favor. Another depicts the 9 worthies, those paragons of masculine virtue, whose deeds were held up as models for kings. Our third, perhaps most tellingly, shows the triumph of Venus, with the goddess of beauty elevated above earthly concerns, her forehead high and pale, her beauty terrible in its perfection. The floor is covered with carpets from Persia and Anatolia, their intricate patterns creating a soft foundation that protects bare feet from the cold stone. Windows of colored glass cast jeweled light across the room, while mirrors of polished silver and crystal reflect and multiply the illumination until the chamber seems to glow with its own inner radiance. The air is heavy with the scent of rosewater, lavender and more exotic perfumes, ambergris from the whale's belly, musk from the deer of Tibet, frankincense from the Holy Lands. Isabeau sits before a mirror of polished silver, far finer than anything a lesser noble might possess. This mirror, commissioned from the workshops of Venice and transported to Paris at enormous expense, represents the pinnacle of medieval craftsmanship. Its surface, backed with sheets of precious silver and held in a frame of carved ivory and gold, provides a reflection so clear and true that it might have been crafted by supernatural means. Her reflection wavers slightly in its surface, but it is clear enough to guide the delicate work that must be done. Around her stands an assembly of women whose expertise in the arts of beauty rivals that of the finest scholars in their knowledge of theology or law. These are not mere servants, but specialists, each trained in particular aspects of the Queen's transformation. Her ladies work with the precision of artists, for they know that their Queen's appearance will be scrutinized by allies and enemies alike, that every detail of her grooming will be discussed in the corridors of power, analyzed by foreign ambassadors and reported to courts across Europe. Dame Marie de Sully, the eldest of these specialists, serves as the chief architect of Isabeau's daily transformation. A woman of perhaps 40 years, Marie comes from a family that has served French queens for 3 generations. Her grandmother attended Queen Joan of Bourbon. Her mother served Queen Joan of Evreux, and now Marie herself has dedicated her life to the science of royal beauty. Her hands, despite her age, remain steady and sure, capable of the most delicate work. Her knowledge of cosmetics and their effects is encyclopedic. She can tell you which combination of herbs will create the perfect shade of pale pink for the lips, which mixture of powders will best catch the light of candles versus sunlight, which oils will preserve the skin against the ravages of winter cold or summer heat. Working alongside Marie is Isabelle de Bourbon, a distant cousin of the royal family whose own beauty once made her a contender for queenship. When political alliances shifted and she lost her chance at a crown, she dedicated herself to ensuring that Isabeau's beauty would never be questioned or diminished. Isabelle specializes in the preparation of the exotic ingredients that give Isabeau's cosmetics their legendary effectiveness. She maintains correspondence with merchants in Venice, Constantinople, and even distant Cathay, seeking new ingredients and techniques that might enhance the Queen's appearance. The process begins, as it does for you, with the careful removal of hair along her natural hairline. But Isabeau's ritual is more elaborate, more costly, more dangerous than your own. Her ladies use knives of the finest Damascus steel, their blades so sharp they can part a hair drawn across their edges. These knives, gifts from the Sultan of Egypt seeking French alliance against the Ottomans, are treated with the reverence due to sacred relics. Each blade is cleaned with wine and perfumed water after every use, wrapped in silk when not in service, and blessed monthly by the court chaplain. The tweezers employed in Isabeau's transformation are works of art in themselves, crafted by the most skilled metalworkers in Paris, from steel so pure it approaches silver in its brilliance. Each pair is made to exact specifications, tested for precision and balance, adjusted until they can grasp the finest hair without slipping or breaking. The Queen owns dozens of these instruments, each slightly different in shape and size, chosen for specific tasks in the complex process of hair removal. Marie begins the morning's work by studying Isabeau's hairline in the changing light of dawn, noting where new growth has appeared overnight, calculating the exact trajectory needed to achieve the perfect curve. This is not random plucking, but precise engineering, based on mathematical principles derived from the study of classical architecture. The ideal forehead, according to the learned treatises that Marie has studied, should follow the proportions of a perfect dome, its curve echoing the architecture of heaven itself. Using a small ruler made of ivory and marked with tiny gradations, Marie measures the distances involved with scientific precision. The forehead must extend exactly 4 3/4 inches above the natural brow line, creating proportions that mirror those found in the most beautiful examples of church architecture. Too little, and Isabeau will appear common, provincial, unworthy of her royal status. Too much, and she risks appearing monstrous, her beauty transformed into something frightening and unnatural. The pastes and powders applied to her skin contain ingredients imported from the farthest reaches of the known world. Pearls from the Indian Ocean, ground to powder so fine it feels like silk between the fingers. Lead from English mines, processed through secret techniques that render it smooth and lustrous. Herbs from the gardens of Constantinople, preserved in honey and wine. Each ingredient represents not just expense, but diplomacy, trade agreements and political alliances that allow French agents to acquire materials that lesser courts can only dream of possessing. One of her ladies, Marie de Sully, mixes the whitening compound with particular care, following a recipe that has been refined over generations and guarded more closely than state secrets. The formula, written in cipher and kept in a locked chest, calls for lead white processed through 7 stages of purification, crushed pearls that have been blessed by the Archbishop of Paris, and the powder of eggshells laid by hens, fed only on pure grain, blessed by monks. To this base, she adds a single drop of mercury, believed to enhance the skin's natural luminescence and provide protection against the evil eye. The mercury, imported from the mines of Almaden in Spain at extraordinary cost, arrives in tiny vials sealed with wax and wrapped in silk. Each drop is more valuable than a common laborer's monthly wages, and its addition to the cosmetic mixture is performed with religious solemnity. Marie crosses herself before opening the vial, murmurs a prayer for the Queen's health and beauty, and adds the mercury with a dropper made from the finest glass, crafted by Venetian masters whose techniques are closely guarded secrets. The mixture gleams like liquid moonlight as she stirs it with a spoon of pure silver, the metal chosen for its believed properties of purification and protection. The stirring itself follows a prescribed pattern, 7 turns clockwise, 7 counterclockwise, then 3 more clockwise to seal the mixture's power. The resulting compound has an almost supernatural quality, seeming to glow with its own inner light, promising transformation that transcends the merely physical. As Marie begins the careful application of this compound to Isabeau's forehead, working with brushes made from the finest sable and applying the mixture in layers so thin they are almost transparent, another lady, Isabelle de Bourbon, reads aloud from a letter that has arrived from Isabeau's sister, now married to a German prince. The letter, written in code to prevent interception by hostile agents, describes the latest fashions at the German court, where women have begun plucking their hairlines even further back, creating foreheads so vast they require new styles of headdress to properly frame them. But the letter contains more than fashion advice. It is intelligence of the highest order. The German princess reports on the political implications of these beauty trends, noting which ladies have adopted the most extreme styles and what this suggests about their influence at court. She describes a rivalry between two duchesses, whose competing beauty routines have divided the court into factions, each supporting different approaches to cosmetic enhancement. One faction favors the traditional methods, while the other embraces dangerous new techniques involving acids and experimental preparations. Isabeau listens with interest, but also with the calculating mind of a politician. She understands that her appearance is not merely personal, it is a statement about the power and sophistication of the French court, a visual argument for France's supremacy among the nations of Europe. If she appears behind the fashion, it suggests that France is provincial, backward, weak, a perception that could affect everything from trade negotiations to military alliances. If she appears too far ahead, she risks seeming frivolous or foreign, out of touch with French traditions and values. The height of her forehead thus becomes a matter of diplomatic significance, requiring careful calculation and constant adjustment. French ambassadors report back from foreign courts on the beauty standards they observe, providing intelligence that helps Isabeau calibrate her appearance for maximum political effect. When preparing to meet with English diplomats, she might adopt a more conservative style that emphasizes French dignity and restraint. When entertaining Italian merchants, she might choose a more elaborate approach that demonstrates French wealth and sophistication. The application of the whitening compound takes nearly an hour, with Marie working with infinite patience, building up layer upon layer of the gleaming paste until Isabeau's forehead extends a full hand's breadth above her natural hairline. Each layer must dry completely before the next is applied, creating a process that cannot be rushed or abbreviated. The skin, where it shows through the white coating, has taken on an almost translucent quality, pale as bone, smooth as marble, seeming to glow with an inner light that appears supernatural to observers. But this is only the beginning of Isabeau's transformation. Over the white base, another lady applies a powder made from ground lily petals and rice flour, imported at great expense from the Orient through trade routes that cross hostile territory and require the protection of armed guards. The lily petals, gathered at dawn when their color is most pure, are dried according to secret methods and ground to a powder so fine it floats in the air like mist. The rice flour, processed through techniques learned from Chinese alchemists, provides a base that catches light without creating shine, maintaining the ethereal quality that sets royal beauty apart from more earthly concerns. This powder is applied with brushes made from the fur of ermines, those creatures whose white coats symbolize royal purity and whose capture requires expeditions to the frozen forests of the far north. The brushes themselves are works of art, their handles carved from narwhal horn and decorated with tiny pearls and gemstones. Each brush is made for a specific purpose, one for the broad application of base powders, another for detailed work around the eyes, a third for the final highlighting that brings the entire composition to life. As the ladies work, they discuss the gossip of the court, but this is not idle chatter, it is intelligence gathering of the highest order. The Duke of Burgundy's daughter has been experimenting with a new technique, using hot wax to remove hair more efficiently, but the method has left scars that she attempts to cover with increasingly elaborate cosmetics. The Duchess of Berry has commissioned a new mirror from Venice, its surface so clear it reveals every flaw with merciless precision, driving her to spend ever more time and money on her appearance. The English Queen has reportedly adopted a new style that makes her forehead appear even higher than Isabeau's own, a development that could be interpreted as a challenge to French supremacy in matters of fashion and beauty. These details matter enormously, for in the competitive world of the court, beauty is both armor and weapon. A queen who appears less beautiful than her rivals risks being dismissed as weak or irrelevant. A court that cannot maintain the highest standards of fashion risks being seen as backward or impoverished. The stakes of these beauty competitions extend far beyond personal vanity. They affect the balance of power between nations, the success of diplomatic missions, the likelihood of advantageous marriages for royal children. Isabeau's eyebrows receive particular attention, for they frame the vast canvas of her forehead and must be perfected with architectural precision. Fashion demands that they be nearly invisible, mere suggestions that do not detract from the dome-like expanse above them. Using a mixture of vinegar derived from wine blessed by the Pope himself and herbs gathered during specific phases of the moon, her ladies gradually lighten the brows until they fade into the pale background of her face. The process stings, sending tears coursing down Isabeau's cheeks, but she does not flinch or complain. She has learned, as you have learned, that beauty requires sacrifice, that power demands pain, that the crown she wears comes with a price that must be paid anew each day. The tears, rather than ruining her cosmetics, are anticipated and planned for. Another lady stands ready with soft cloths to dab them away before they can damage the careful work being done. The vinegar solution used on her eyebrows is prepared according to a formula that dates back to the time of Charlemagne, refined through centuries of use by French queens. The vinegar itself comes from grapes grown in vineyards that belong to the crown, processed by monks who have taken vows of secrecy regarding the techniques they employ. The herbs mixed into the solution include some that grow only in the royal gardens, tended by gardeners whose families have served the crown for generations. The final touch is the application of a subtle tint, a barely perceptible blush that brings warmth to the pale skin without compromising its ethereal quality. This powder, made from crushed rose petals gathered from the gardens of Provence and coral ground from specimens collected in the Mediterranean, is applied with the softest brush, creating a glow that suggests health and youth without appearing artificial. The roses used in this final powder are not ordinary flowers, but specimens chosen for their perfect color and cultivated using techniques passed down from Roman times. Each rose is examined by experts who can detect the slightest variation in hue, ensuring that only the most perfect specimens are selected for the queen's use. The coral, equally precious, comes from reefs that French merchants risk their lives to harvest, diving into dangerous waters under the protection of royal warships. The effect is stunning. Isabeau's forehead now resembles a perfect dome, pale and luminous, framed by the dark silk of her hair. But as Isabeau examines herself in the mirror, studying her reflection with the intensity of a general reviewing battle plans, she is not thinking only of beauty. She is thinking of power, of survival, of the delicate balance she must maintain as queen of a troubled realm. Her husband, Charles VI, suffers from what we now know was likely a form of mental illness, periods of madness that leave him unable to govern, sometimes unable even to recognize his wife and children. During these episodes, which can last for months, Isabeau must rule in his stead, making decisions that affect the fate of millions. She must negotiate with rebellious nobles, manage the royal finances, conduct diplomacy with foreign powers, all while maintaining the fiction that she is merely serving as regent for her temporarily indisposed husband. In such a position, her appearance becomes a tool of statecraft more crucial than any sword or treaty. When she meets with foreign ambassadors, they see not just a woman, but a symbol of French nobility, French power, French sophistication. The height of her forehead suggests intelligence and refinement, qualities that are essential when she must negotiate complex treaties or resolve disputes between powerful nobles. The pallor of her skin indicates that she does not labor with her hands, that she is above the common concerns of ordinary people, that she belongs to the rarefied world of royal blood and divine right. The perfection of her grooming demonstrates the wealth and organization of her court, suggesting that France possesses the resources and stability necessary to honor its commitments and protect its allies. Foreign diplomats study her appearance with the same attention they give to the size of her armies or the condition of her treasury, understanding that a queen who can maintain such standards of beauty must command resources and loyalty of the highest order. Yet Isabeau's letters, preserved in the royal archives and written in her own hand during quiet moments, stolen from the demands of statecraft, reveal a woman acutely aware of the double-edged nature of her beauty. In a letter to her daughter Michelle, written when the princess was preparing for her own marriage to the Duke of Burgundy, she writes of the burden of constant scrutiny, of the way her appearance is discussed and dissected by friend and enemy alike. They speak of my forehead, as if it were a territory to be conquered, she observes with remarkable insight into her own position, measuring its proportions as a general might measure the walls of a fortress. Each morning, I construct anew the face that must serve as the public symbol of royal authority. Yet each evening, I remove these carefully applied layers and find beneath them a woman whose natural features have become strange to her own eyes. The irony is not lost on her that the very feature that marks her as beautiful, that demonstrates her adherence to the ideals of her time, also makes her vulnerable to criticism and attack. Critics at court whisper that her high forehead indicates pride, vanity, a dangerous ambition that sits ill on a woman. They point to classical texts that warn against women who seek to improve upon God's handiwork, suggesting that Isabeau's daily transformation represents a kind of blasphemy, an attempt to usurp divine prerogatives. Foreign diplomats report back to their masters on the details of her appearance, searching for signs of weakness or strength in the curve of her brow, the pallor of her skin, the perfection of her cosmetic enhancement. English spies write detailed descriptions of her beauty routine, looking for evidence that France is spending too much on luxury while neglecting military preparedness. German observers note every change in her appearance, wondering whether variations in her grooming reflect changes in her political position or her husband's condition. As the years pass and the demands of rule take their toll, Isabeau's morning ritual becomes both more elaborate and more desperate. The lead-based cosmetics, applied daily for decades in increasingly heavy concentrations, begin to exact their terrible price. She begins to suffer from headaches that strike without warning, mood swings that see her alternating between periods of manic energy and deep depression, episodes of confusion that mirror her husband's madness and terrify her ladies-in-waiting. The mercury in her whitening compounds, that precious ingredient added drop by drop over the course of years, accumulates in her nervous system, causing tremors in her hands that make the application of cosmetics increasingly difficult. Her fingers, once steady enough to apply the finest powders with precision, begin to shake uncontrollably, forcing her to rely ever more heavily on her lady's expertise while losing the personal control over her appearance that had been one of her few sources of autonomy. Her ladies notice the changes, but do not understand their cause, for the science that would explain the connection between cosmetics and illness lies centuries in the future. They attribute her symptoms to the stress of ruling during her husband's periods of madness, to the burden of making decisions that affect the fate of nations, to the natural effects of age and the trials of bearing multiple children. They respond by making her beauty routine even more elaborate, adding new ingredients to her cosmetics, seeking ever more perfect results that might restore her legendary beauty and, they hope, her health. The cycle of beauty and poison accelerates with each passing year. New preparations are tried, each promising miraculous results, each containing higher concentrations of the very substances that are slowly destroying her. Alchemists and physicians compete to create cosmetics worthy of the queen, adding silver, gold, and exotic compounds to mixtures that grow ever more complex and dangerous. The quest for perfect beauty becomes a form of slow suicide, though none involved understand the true nature of what they are doing. In her private writings, discovered only centuries later in sealed chambers of the royal palace, Isabeau reflects on the strange nature of her daily transformation with the insight of a natural philosopher. "Each morning I become someone else," she writes to her confessor in a letter that was never sent. "I cover my natural self with pastes and powders until I am unrecognizable even to myself. Yet this false face is the one the world knows, the one they judge, the one they remember. Which is more real, the woman in the mirror before the transformation or the queen who emerges afterward?" This question haunts her as she ages, as her beauty ritual becomes less about enhancement and more about preservation, about maintaining an appearance that grows more difficult with each passing year. The high forehead that once seemed so natural, so effortless, now requires constant vigilance and ever more sophisticated techniques. New hairs sprout daily along her hairline, each one a small defeat in her battle against time and nature. The lead-based cosmetics that once gave her skin an ethereal glow now serve primarily to hide the damage they themselves have caused, creating a vicious cycle of concealment and deterioration. She begins to understand that she has become trapped in her own creation, that the beautiful Queen Isabeau of Bavaria is both her greatest achievement and her prison. The woman beneath the cosmetics grows increasingly frail and ill, while the public figure must remain forever perfect, forever beautiful, forever worthy of the crown she wears. The gap between her private reality and public persona widens with each passing day, until she feels like an actor playing a role from which she can never escape. Yet she persists, as you persist, as countless women of her era persisted, in the daily act of reconstruction. For Isabeau understands, as they all understood, that this ritual is about more than beauty. It is about belonging, about safety, about the right to exist in a world that offers women few paths to power and security. Her forehead, artificial as it may be, represents her claim to authority, her right to rule in her husband's absence, her value as a political asset and diplomatic tool. Even as her health fails and her mind begins to show the effects of decades of chemical poisoning, she continues to submit to the daily ritual of transformation. Her ladies, now themselves aging and showing the effects of their own exposure to dangerous cosmetics, work with increasing desperation to maintain the illusion of eternal youth and perfect beauty. The process takes longer each day, requires more layers of cosmetics, demands ever greater skill and artistry to achieve results that satisfy no one completely. The court meanwhile pretends not to notice the changes, understanding that acknowledging Isabeau's decline would threaten the stability of the realm. Foreign ambassadors learn to focus on her clothing and jewelry rather than her face, while French nobles develop elaborate protocols for interaction that minimize close scrutiny of her appearance. The fiction of the beautiful queen must be maintained, even as the reality crumbles beneath layers of lead and mercury. When Isabeau dies in 1435, after 45 years of marriage to the Mad King and 3 decades of intermittent rule, the chroniclers describe her as having been beautiful until the end, her forehead still high and pale, her skin still luminous with the artificial glow of her cosmetics. They do not mention the cost of this beauty, the daily pain of its creation, the slow poisoning that contributed to her death. They remember only the image she worked so hard to create and maintain, the perfect queen with the perfect forehead, the living embodiment of medieval ideals of feminine beauty. But in the quiet of her tomb, beneath the marble effigy that shows her with that characteristic high forehead and those ethereally pale features, Isabeau rests with her natural face restored. The lead and mercury have long since crumbled to dust. The powders and pastes dissolved into nothing by the passage of centuries. What remains is the woman she was before the daily transformation, the face she wore in private moments when no one was watching, when she could simply be herself. The effigy above shows an idealized version of her beauty, carved by master sculptors who worked from portraits created during her lifetime. But even these portraits were based on her cosmetically enhanced appearance, meaning that no true record exists of what Isabeau actually looked like without her daily transformation. She succeeded so completely in creating an artificial version of herself that the natural woman was erased from history, remembered only in the abstract knowledge that she must have looked different beneath the layers of medieval cosmetics. In this, perhaps there is a kind of peace. The endless cycle of beauty and pain of construction and destruction has finally ended. The high forehead that defined her public image has faded into history, but the woman who endured the daily ritual of its creation lives on in her letters, her decisions, her influence on the world she helped to shape. The political marriages she arranged, the treaties she negotiated, the artistic patronage she provided. These achievements outlast any physical beauty, providing a more permanent legacy than the most perfect cosmetic enhancement. As you lie in your modern bed, far removed from the painful beauty rituals of Isabeau's time, surrounded by products that promise transformation without danger, you might reflect on the strange continuity between her world and yours. The tools have changed, the techniques have evolved, the understanding of chemistry and biology has advanced beyond medieval comprehension, but the fundamental desire to transform oneself, to meet the expectations of society, to find power and safety through appearance, these remain remarkably constant across the centuries. Isabeau's story reminds us that behind every beauty ritual, no matter how strange it might seem to contemporary eyes, lies a human being making choices about how to survive and thrive in the world they inhabit. Her high forehead was not just a fashion statement, but a daily act of courage, a refusal to be dismissed or overlooked, a claim to power in a world that offered women few alternatives. The pain she endured, the risks she accepted, the sacrifices she made, all were calculated choices in a game where the stakes were nothing less than survival itself. Her legacy challenges us to consider our own beauty rituals with the same historical perspective, to understand them not as matters of personal vanity, but as responses to social pressures, political necessities, and the eternal human desire to control how we are perceived by others. In the mirror of her experience, we might glimpse something of our own motivations, our own fears, our own hopes for transformation and acceptance in a world that judges us, as it judged her, by the surface we present to its scrutiny. To understand why medieval women willingly endured such pain to reshape their foreheads, we must journey deeper into the medieval mind, into a world where every curve of the human form carried profound meaning, where beauty was not merely aesthetic, but moral, spiritual, even mathematical. The high forehead that women like Isabeau cultivated was not simply fashion. It was a complex symbol that spoke to the deepest beliefs of medieval society. Imagine yourself in the scriptorium of a great monastery, where monks bend over illuminated manuscripts, their quills scratching softly against parchment as they copy the wisdom of the ancients. The air is thick with the scent of ink and vellum, punctuated by the sweet smoke of beeswax candles that flicker in the stone chambers. Here, in the margins of their texts, these scholarly men debate the nature of beauty, the meaning of proportion, the divine geometry that they believe governs all creation. Brother Thomas, a learned monk who has studied the writings of Aristotle and Augustine, dips his quill in ink, made from oak galls, and begins to write. His subject is the human face, and specifically the forehead, that canvas of flesh that reveals, he believes, the very nature of the soul within. According to the theories he has inherited from classical antiquity and refined through Christian theology, the forehead is the seat of reason, the dwelling place of the intellect, the mirror of divine wisdom. The medieval understanding of the forehead begins with the ancient theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, which were believed to govern both physical health and moral character. A high, prominent forehead indicated a predominance of the sanguine humour associated with warmth, optimism, and intelligence. Such a forehead suggested a person of noble character, capable of rational thought and moral judgment. But the symbolism went deeper still. Medieval scholars, influenced by the mathematical theories of Pythagoras and Plato, believed that beauty itself was a manifestation of divine proportion. They spoke of the golden ratio, the mathematical relationship that appeared in the spirals of shells, the branching of trees, the proportions of the human body. A forehead that extended precisely 1/3 of the face's total length was considered perfectly proportioned, a reflection of the cosmic harmony that governed all creation. In the cathedral workshops, where master craftsmen carved stone into angels and saints, this understanding of proportion guided every chisel stroke. The sculptures that graced the great cathedrals of Europe, Notre Dame, Chartres, Canterbury, showed holy figures with foreheads that stretched high and smooth, their natural hairlines transformed into perfect domes of marble. These images were not mere artistic choices, but theological statements, visual sermons that taught the faithful about the nature of divine beauty. The Virgin Mary, in particular, was always depicted with a forehead of exceptional height and purity. Painters and sculptors, working from pattern books that codified the proper proportions for sacred figures, created images of the Madonna with foreheads that seemed to glow with inner light. These representations established the high forehead as a mark of spiritual purity, of closeness to God, of the kind of perfection that human beings might aspire to achieve. This religious significance helps explain why medieval women were willing to endure such pain to reshape their foreheads. They were not simply following fashion, but participating in a form of spiritual practice, transforming their physical appearance to reflect their moral aspirations. A woman who plucked her hairline to create a high forehead was making a statement about her virtue, her intelligence, her worthiness to be counted among the blessed. The connection between forehead and virtue was reinforced by the writings of medieval physicians and natural philosophers. Albertus Magnus, the great Dominican scholar, wrote extensively about the relationship between physical appearance and moral character. In his treatise on the secrets of women, he argued that a woman's forehead revealed her capacity for reason, her ability to control her passions, her fitness for the roles that society assigned to her. A high forehead, according to Albertus, indicated a woman of temperate disposition, capable of the kind of rational thought that made her a suitable companion for a learned man. Such a woman could be trusted with the management of a household, the education of children, the complex social negotiations that defined noble life. Her forehead became a kind of credential, a visible proof of her intellectual and moral qualifications. The archaeological evidence supports this symbolic interpretation. Excavations of medieval burial sites have revealed cosmetic implements, tweezers, small knives, containers for powders and pastes, buried alongside their owners. These tools were not merely practical objects, but sacred implements, instruments of transformation that helped women achieve the divine proportions that their society valued. In the tomb of Lady Margaret de Clare, buried in 1312 at Tewkesbury Abbey, archaeologists discovered a remarkable collection of cosmetic tools. Among them was a small silver knife, its handle engraved with religious symbols, its blade worn smooth by countless uses. Beside it lay a set of tweezers, each pair crafted for a specific purpose, one for fine hairs, another for coarser growth, a third designed for the delicate work around the eyes. Most intriguing of all was a small pot containing traces of a white substance that analysis revealed to be a mixture of lead, pearls, and crushed eggshells, the same combination that Isabeau's ladies would have used centuries later. But this pot was different, for it was decorated with religious imagery. The symbols of the Virgin Mary worked into its surface in delicate silver wire. This was not merely a cosmetic container, but a sacred object, a reminder that the transformation of the forehead was a spiritual as well as physical practice. The symbolic power of the high forehead extended beyond individual women to shape the broader culture of medieval Europe. In the courts of love that flourished in 12th century France, poets and troubadours sang of ladies whose foreheads were white as ivory, smooth as polished marble, bright as the moon in her fullness. These were not mere poetic conceits, but coded references to the spiritual and intellectual qualities that the high forehead represented. The famous Roman de la Rose, one of the most influential works of medieval literature, describes the ideal woman in terms that would have been instantly recognizable to any medieval reader. Her forehead, the poet tells us, extends from temple to temple without fault or blemish, creating a perfect arch that reflects the harmony of the spheres. This description was not fantasy, but a precise rendering of the beauty standards that governed medieval society. Yet the symbolism of the high forehead was not without its complications. Church authorities, while they celebrated the spiritual significance of divine proportion, were also wary of the vanity that such elaborate beauty rituals might encourage. Sermons from the period reveal a complex tension between the desire for spiritual perfection and the dangers of worldly pride. Thomas Aquinas, the great theologian of the 13th century, wrote extensively about this tension. In his Summa Theologica, he argued that the pursuit of beauty was morally neutral, neither good nor evil in itself, but dependent on the intentions behind it. A woman who shaped her forehead to better reflect divine proportion was engaging in a worthy practice, but one who did so merely to attract attention or to compete with other women was guilty of the sin of pride. This theological nuance helps explain why medieval beauty rituals were often accompanied by prayer and religious observance. The transformation of the forehead was not undertaken lightly, but as a serious spiritual practice, one that required careful attention to the state of one's soul. Women would often confess their beauty practices to their priests, seeking guidance about the proper balance between spiritual aspiration and worldly vanity. The influence of Arabic and Islamic scholarship added another layer to the medieval understanding of the forehead. Translations of works by scholars like Al-Kindi and Avicenna introduced European readers to sophisticated theories about the relationship between physical appearance and mental capacity. These works, which circulated widely in medieval universities, provided scientific justification for the belief that the forehead revealed the nature of the mind within. According to these Islamic sources, the forehead was divided into distinct regions, each corresponding to different intellectual faculties. The area above the eyebrows governed practical intelligence, the ability to solve problems and make decisions. The middle region controlled memory and learning. The highest part, near the hairline, was associated with the most elevated forms of thought, philosophy, theology, the contemplation of divine truth. This detailed mapping of the forehead is intellectual geography, helps explain why medieval women were so precise in their beauty rituals. They were not simply trying to create a fashionable appearance, but to reveal and enhance the different aspects of their intelligence. A woman who extended her forehead to its fullest possible height was making a claim about her capacity for the highest forms of thought, her ability to engage with the most sophisticated ideas of her time. The practical implications of this belief system were profound. In a world where women had few opportunities for formal education, the height of their forehead became a way of demonstrating intellectual capacity. A woman with a properly proportioned forehead could command respect in conversations about theology, philosophy, and natural science. She could participate in the scholarly discussions that took place in the courts and monasteries of medieval Europe. Archaeological evidence from medieval art collections reveals the widespread nature of these beliefs. Portraits of learned women, abbesses, scholars, patrons of the arts, consistently show them with foreheads of exceptional height. These images were not mere artistic convention, but careful documentation of the way these women actually appeared, their foreheads sculpted through daily ritual to reflect their intellectual aspirations. The manuscript illuminations of Christine de Pizan, often considered the first professional female writer in European history, show her with a forehead that extends almost to the crown of her head. Contemporary accounts describe her daily beauty ritual, which included not only the usual plucking and whitening, but the application of special oils believed to enhance mental clarity. Her forehead became a kind of advertisement for her intellectual capabilities, a visual argument for taking her seriously as a thinker and scholar. The daily reality of these transformative rituals reveals the extraordinary dedication medieval women brought to their pursuit of divine proportion. Each morning, before the household stirred, noble ladies would gather in their private chambers with their ladies-in-waiting, beginning a process that could take hours to complete. The ritual began with prayers, invoking the Virgin Mary's protection and asking for strength to endure the pain that would follow. The implements themselves were works of art, crafted by skilled metalworkers who understood their sacred purpose. Tweezers were forged from the finest steel, their tips filed to precise points that could grasp individual hairs. Some were decorated with precious stones believed to possess protective properties, sapphires to guard against evil influences, pearls to maintain purity of intention. The handles were often inscribed with Latin prayers or biblical verses, transforming these tools into sacred objects that connected the physical act of hair removal to the spiritual realm. The process itself followed strict protocols handed down through generations of noble women. The forehead was divided into precise sections, each requiring different techniques and tools. The area immediately above the eyebrows demanded the most delicate touch, as the skin here was thin and sensitive. Tiny hairs were plucked one by one, following the natural arch of the brow but extending it far beyond its original boundaries. Moving upward, the ladies encountered the more robust hairs of the natural hairline. Here, stronger implements were required, small, sharp knives that could cut close to the skin, followed by tweezers to remove the stubborn roots. The pain was intense, causing tears that were carefully wiped away lest they disturb the chalk-based powders already applied to whiten the skin. The most challenging area was the temples, where the hairline curved toward the ears. This region required perfect symmetry, as any irregularity would be immediately visible to observers. Master practitioners developed special techniques for achieving the precise angles required, using silk threads stretched between fixed points to ensure perfect alignment. The process in this area could take an hour or more, with frequent pauses to check the emerging proportions against mirrors of polished metal. Throughout this ordeal, the women sustained themselves with the knowledge that they were participating in something far greater than mere vanity. They recited prayers, meditated on religious texts, and encouraged each other with reminders of the spiritual significance of their actions. The pain itself became a form of penance, a physical suffering that purified the soul while transforming the body. The seasonal nature of these rituals added another layer of complexity to medieval beauty practices. Spring brought new growth that required constant vigilance, while winter's slower metabolism allowed for more dramatic interventions. Summer's heat made the whitening compounds more effective but also more dangerous, as lead-based preparations could cause severe reactions when exposed to strong sunlight. Some women developed elaborate scheduling systems, timing their most intensive beauty work to coincide with religious festivals or important social occasions. The weeks leading up to Easter, for example, became periods of intensive preparation, as the faithful sought to present themselves at their most beautiful for the celebration of Christ's resurrection. Similarly, the Christmas season saw noble ladies undertaking particularly ambitious forehead modifications, believing that the Christ child would bless those who honored him with their physical perfection. The social implications of these practices extended far beyond individual transformation. In the marriage markets of medieval Europe, a woman's forehead became a crucial factor in determining her desirability as a wife. Marriage contracts from the period sometimes included specific clauses about the bride's physical appearance, with particular attention paid to the proportions of her face. A high, well-shaped forehead could add significantly to a woman's dowry value, while an improperly proportioned one might reduce her marriage prospects considerably. This economic dimension of beauty created a complex industry of specialists who catered to women's needs for forehead modification. Professional hair pluckers traveled from court to court, carrying their specialized tools and secret formulas. These practitioners were often women of humble birth who had developed exceptional skills, finding in this dangerous profession a path to relative prosperity and social advancement. The most successful of these specialists guarded their techniques jealously, passing them down only to carefully chosen apprentices. Some developed signature styles that became associated with particular regions or courts. The French arch favored flowing curves that extended the forehead in graceful sweeps, while the English dome created more geometric proportions based on mathematical principles derived from cathedral architecture. Medical knowledge of the period, limited though it was, recognized the dangers inherent in these practices. Physicians like Guy de Chauliac wrote treatises warning of the risks associated with lead poisoning, infections from contaminated tools, and scarring from overly aggressive hair removal. Yet these warnings were largely ignored, as the social and spiritual benefits of forehead modification were deemed to outweigh the physical risks. The preservation of beauty secrets became a crucial aspect of women's culture in medieval Europe. Recipes for whitening compounds were passed down through family lines like precious heirlooms, each generation adding refinements and improvements. Some of these formulas included exotic ingredients imported at great expense from distant lands, crushed pearls from the Persian Gulf, white lead from Spanish mines, powdered unicorn horn from the markets of Constantinople. The international trade in beauty supplies reveals the global reach of medieval women's commitment to forehead modification. Merchants specialized in cosmetic ingredients, traveling established routes that connected European courts with suppliers in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. These traders understood that they were dealing not merely in commodities, but in the raw materials of spiritual transformation, and they priced their goods accordingly. As you rest in the comfort of your modern bed, consider the extraordinary complexity of meaning that medieval women packed into the simple act of plucking their hairlines. They were not merely following fashion, but participating in a sophisticated system of symbolic communication, one that connected their daily beauty practices to the deepest beliefs of their civilization. The high forehead that caused them such daily pain was their way of claiming space in a world that offered women few opportunities for intellectual expression. It was their method of asserting their capacity for reason, their right to be taken seriously, their connection to the divine proportion that governed all creation. In the careful architecture of their transformed faces, they wrote a kind of autobiography, telling the story of who they were and who they aspired to become. The rhythm of scraping and plucking, the careful application of whitening compounds, the precise measurement of proportions, all of this was part of an elaborate ritual that connected the physical transformation of the body to the spiritual transformation of the soul. Medieval women understood, perhaps better than we do today, that beauty is never simply about appearance but about meaning, about the stories we tell about ourselves and the world we inhabit. In contemplating their dedication, their suffering, and their unwavering commitment to an ideal that seems so foreign to our modern sensibilities, we catch a glimpse of the profound depths of human aspiration. These women, armed with nothing more than tweezers and determination, sought to remake themselves in the image of divine perfection. Their foreheads became canvases upon which they painted their deepest hopes, their highest aspirations, their most sacred beliefs about the nature of beauty, intelligence, and spiritual worth. Now let us leave the perfumed chambers of queens and the sacred halls of learning and step into a different world entirely, one where the high forehead remained an ideal, but where the daily realities of survival created very different approaches to beauty, very different relationships with pain, and very different understandings of what it meant to be a woman in medieval society. Picture yourself in the cottage of Agnes the baker, rising before dawn on a market day in the year 1387. The single room that serves as both home and workshop is already warm from the banked coals in the bread oven, and the air carries the yeasty scent of dough that has been rising through the night. Agnes moves quietly so as not to wake her 3 children, who sleep together on a straw mattress in the corner, their faces peaceful in the flickering light of a tallow candle. Agnes, like her noble sisters, begins her day with attention to her appearance, but her ritual is necessarily different, shaped by the demands of her work and the limitations of her circumstances. She owns no mirror of polished silver, no elaborate collection of cosmetic implements. Instead, she peers at her reflection in a bowl of water, the surface rippling slightly with her breath, distorting her features into wavering shapes that tell her little about the effectiveness of her grooming. Her forehead, like those of most working women, retains its natural proportions. She has neither the time nor the tools for the elaborate plucking ritual that defines noble beauty. Her hairline follows the curve that nature gave her, framed by strands that escape from her linen cap, despite her best efforts to contain them. Yet this does not mean she is indifferent to the ideals of her time. Rather, she has found ways to approximate them within the constraints of her circumstances. From a small earthenware pot, Agnes takes a pinch of flour mixed with ground chalk, her own version of the whitening powders that noble ladies apply to their foreheads. She works this mixture into the skin above her eyebrows, creating a pale band that catches the candlelight and gives the illusion of a higher hairline. The effect is subtle, barely noticeable to the casual observer, but it represents her own small act of participation in the beauty standards of her age. The flour serves multiple purposes. It absorbs the sweat that will inevitably bead on her forehead as she works over the hot ovens. It provides some protection from the ash and soot that fill the air of her bakery. And most importantly, it signals her awareness of and respect for the prevailing ideals of feminine beauty. She may not be able to achieve the marble-smooth dome of a court lady, but she can at least gesture toward it. As Agnes works, her neighbor Marguerite arrives to help with the morning's baking. Marguerite is a weaver, her fingers permanently stained with the dyes she uses to color wool, her back slightly bent from years of hunching over her loom. She too has made small accommodations to the beauty standards of her time, but in ways that reflect her own circumstances and needs. Marguerite has taught herself to use her weaving skills to create the illusion of a higher forehead. She has woven herself a cap of the finest linen she can afford, one that sits unusually high on her head, creating a band of pale fabric that mimics the effect of an extended forehead. The cap is her masterpiece of practical beauty. It protects her hair from the dust and fibers of her workshop, while allowing her to participate, however modestly, in the fashion of her betters. The two women work side by side in comfortable silence, their hands moving with the practiced efficiency of long experience. Agnes shapes loaves while Marguerite tends the fire, and in their quiet cooperation, we see a different model of medieval womanhood, one defined not by the pursuit of an impossible ideal, but by the practical navigation of daily challenges. Yet even in this humble setting, the influence of noble beauty standards makes itself felt. When the baker from the next village arrives to court Marguerite, both women notice how his eyes linger on her high-set cap, how he comments favorably on her noble bearing. They understand, without discussing it directly, that even her modest attempt to approximate the high forehead ideal has made her more attractive in his calculating gaze. This dynamic, the way that elite beauty standards filter down through the social hierarchy, creating pressure and opportunity in equal measure, defines much of medieval women's experience. In the market square where Agnes sells her bread, she observes the wives of prosperous merchants, women who can afford more elaborate beauty rituals, but who remain bound by the practical demands of their station. Isabella, the cloth merchant's wife, represents this middle tier of medieval society. She can afford a proper mirror, imported tweezers, and whitening compounds made from ingredients more refined than flour and chalk. Her morning ritual takes longer than Agnes's, but remains far simpler than Isabeau's. She plucks the most obvious hairs from her hairline, applies a modest layer of whitening paste, and arranges her hair to create the illusion of greater height. But Isabella's relationship with these beauty practices is complicated by her position in society. As the wife of a successful merchant, she has access to enough wealth to attempt the noble ideal, but she must be careful not to appear to be reaching beyond her station. Too high a forehead might be interpreted as presumption, as an attempt to claim social status that properly belongs to her betters. Too natural an appearance, on the other hand, might suggest that her husband's business is not prosperous enough to afford proper grooming. This delicate balance requires constant negotiation. Isabella must read the social signals of her community with careful attention, adjusting her appearance to match not just the beauty standards of her time, but the complex hierarchy that governs her world. Her forehead becomes a kind of social barometer, its height carefully calibrated to signal respect for the nobility, while claiming appropriate status within the merchant class. The complexity of Isabella's position reveals itself in the careful calculation that goes into every aspect of her appearance. She employs a part-time servant, a young woman named Beatrice, who comes 3 mornings a week to assist with her beauty ritual. This arrangement allows Isabella to achieve a more refined appearance than she could manage alone, while demonstrating her family's prosperity to the community. Yet she must be careful not to employ Beatrice too frequently, lest she appear to be aping the daily routines of the nobility. Beatrice herself represents another layer in this complex social hierarchy. The daughter of a failed merchant, she has learned the arts of beauty from watching her former mistress, a minor noble who fell from grace during a political upheaval. Now Beatrice moves through the merchant community, carrying knowledge of elite beauty practices from household to household, adapting noble techniques to suit the more modest circumstances of her middle-class clients. In Isabella's chamber, Beatrice demonstrates how to achieve the appearance of a higher forehead without the extreme measures employed by court ladies. She shows Isabella how to use shadows and highlights, applying darker pigments to the natural hairline to make it seem to recede while emphasizing the pale expanse of the actual forehead. These techniques, requiring skill rather than expensive implements, allow merchant wives to participate in the beauty culture of their betters without the enormous investment of time and money that true forehead modification demands. The serving women who work in noble households face their own unique challenges in navigating these beauty standards. Sarah, who serves as lady's maid to the local baron's wife, spends her mornings helping her mistress achieve the perfect high forehead, while her own appearance must remain carefully subordinate. She cannot allow her own forehead to compete with her mistress's, yet she cannot appear so unkempt as to reflect poorly on the household. Sarah's solution is characteristic of the creative compromises that defined medieval women's lives. She maintains her natural hairline, but uses subtle techniques to create the impression of participation in elite beauty culture. She arranges her hair to frame her face in ways that echo the proportions of noble beauty. She keeps her skin scrupulously clean and pale, and she carries herself with the kind of dignity that suggests familiarity with refinement, even as she acknowledges her subordinate position. The knowledge Sarah gains through her service becomes a valuable commodity in her own social sphere. In the evenings, after her duties in the great house are complete, she returns to the servants' quarters, where she is consulted by other women seeking advice on beauty matters. Her proximity to noble practices gives her a kind of authority, even though she herself cannot fully participate in them. These informal networks of beauty knowledge created a parallel economy of information and skill that operated alongside the formal structures of medieval society. Women who possessed secrets, whether through service in noble households, brief periods of prosperity, or simply natural talent for the arts of appearance, found themselves at the center of communities of learning and mutual support. In the villages that dot the countryside, far from the centers of power and fashion, the high forehead ideal takes on yet another form. Here, where most women work in the fields alongside their husbands, where survival depends on physical strength and endurance, the pursuit of beauty must be balanced against more practical concerns. Yet even here, the influence of elite culture makes itself felt. The village priest, educated in the cathedral schools, preaches sermons that reference the divine proportion, the spiritual significance of proper appearance. The traveling merchants who bring goods from the cities also bring stories of court fashions, descriptions of noble ladies whose beauty defies description. These accounts filter through the village, creating dreams and aspirations that shape local understandings of feminine ideals. Marie the farmer's wife listens to these stories as she works her small plot of land, her hands rough from handling the plow, her face brown from exposure to sun and wind. She cannot afford the luxury of whitening compounds, cannot spare the time for elaborate grooming rituals. Yet on holy days when the village gathers for Mass, she makes her own small gesture toward the beauty ideals of her age. She has saved her coins to purchase a length of fine linen, which she has sewn into a veil that sits high on her forehead, creating the illusion of noble proportions. When she kneels in the village church surrounded by her neighbors, she becomes part of a larger community of women, all making their own compromises with the beauty standards of their time, all finding ways to participate in a cultural ideal that was created by and for a very different class of people. The seasonal rhythms of rural life created their own patterns of beauty practice. Spring planting left little time for elaborate grooming, but summer's longer days allowed for evening rituals of hair washing and herb gathering. Autumn brought the preparation of cosmetic ingredients, elderflower water for skin whitening, rose petals for perfumed oils, walnuts whose hulls could darken eyebrows and create the illusion of contrast with a pale forehead. Winter, when agricultural work slowed, became the season for more ambitious beauty projects. Village women would gather in groups, sharing techniques and ingredients, teaching their daughters the arts they would need to navigate their own adult lives. These gatherings were part social event, part educational workshop, part cultural preservation society, ensuring that knowledge of beauty practices would survive even in communities far removed from elite culture. The tools of rural beauty were necessarily different from those of the nobility. Instead of silver tweezers, village women used thorns or carefully sharpened splinters of wood. Rather than polished mirrors, they relied on still water or pieces of mica when they could find them. Their whitening compounds came from local sources: chalk from quarries, flour from their own grain, ash from specific woods known to produce the finest powder. These adaptations required creativity and skill that often exceeded what was needed in wealthier households. A noble lady needed only to purchase the finest implements and ingredients. A peasant woman had to understand the properties of different materials, the techniques for processing raw ingredients, the subtle arts of substitution and approximation. In many ways, the beauty practices of poor women were more sophisticated than those of the rich, requiring deeper knowledge and greater ingenuity. The irony of this situation is not lost on the more thoughtful observers of medieval society. Christine de Pizan, in her writings about women's experiences, notes the way that beauty standards created by the leisure class become burdens for working women who must find ways to approximate impossible ideals while meeting the practical demands of their lives. The baker's wife, Christine writes, rises before dawn to tend her ovens, her hands shaped by labor, her face marked by heat and smoke. Yet she too must attempt the pale perfection that nature and circumstance have denied her, for the world judges all women by the same impossible standard, regardless of their station or their struggles. This observation reveals one of the most troubling aspects of medieval beauty culture, the way that ideals created by the most privileged members of society became standards by which all women were judged. The high forehead that represented leisure and refinement for a noble lady became a source of inadequacy and struggle for women who had neither the time nor the resources to achieve it. The psychological burden of these impossible standards manifested in different ways across the social spectrum. Noble women with the resources to approximate the ideal suffered from the anxiety of maintaining perfection and the fear of aging. Merchant wives struggled with the delicate balance between aspiration and presumption. Working women faced the daily reminder of their inadequacy, the constant awareness that their natural appearance marked them as inferior in the eyes of their society. Yet there were also moments of resistance, spaces where working women created their own definitions of beauty and worth. In the all-female environments of convents, where women from various social backgrounds lived together under religious vows, different understandings of appearance sometimes emerged. Sister Joan, a former merchant's daughter who had taken vows at the Abbey of St. Catherine, wrote in her spiritual diary about the relief she felt in abandoning the daily pursuit of the high forehead ideal. "God sees not the height of our brows," she observed, "but the depth of our devotion. In this holy place we are judged not by the fashion of our faces, but by the faithfulness of our hearts." Yet even in the convent, the influence of secular beauty standards could not be entirely escaped. The Abbey's chronicles record disputes about the proper way for nuns to arrange their veils, with some sisters arguing for styles that created the illusion of higher foreheads, while others insisted on more natural appearances. These debates, seemingly trivial, reflected deeper questions about the relationship between worldly and spiritual values, between the standards of secular society and the ideals of religious life. The abbess herself, a woman of noble birth who had brought substantial dowry lands to the convent, maintained a modified version of the beauty practices she had known in the world. Her mourning ritual included the careful arrangement of her veil to suggest the proportions of noble beauty, though she justified this as maintaining the dignity appropriate to her office rather than succumbing to worldly vanity. As the medieval period progressed and economic changes created new opportunities for social mobility, the tension between elite beauty standards and practical realities became even more pronounced. The wives of successful craftsmen and merchants found themselves with the resources to attempt more elaborate beauty rituals, but also with the social sensitivity to understand the dangers of appearing to reach beyond their proper station. This dynamic created what historians have called the democratization of vanity, the gradual spread of elite beauty practices down through the social hierarchy, creating new markets for cosmetic products and beauty services, while also generating new forms of social anxiety and competition. The growth of towns and cities during the later medieval period accelerated this process. Urban environments brought different social classes into closer contact, making the visual markers of status more important, while also providing new opportunities for social climbing. A merchant's wife who perfected the art of forehead modification might find herself accepted in circles previously closed to her family, while a woman who failed to keep up with changing standards might find herself socially marginalized despite her family's wealth. The development of guilds for various crafts also influenced beauty practices, as the wives of guild masters needed to present themselves appropriately at official functions. These women often formed their own informal organizations, sharing techniques and supporting each other's efforts to maintain the dignity of their husband's professional status. Guild records from the period include references to collections taken up to help the widow of a master craftsman maintain her appearance during her mourning period, recognizing that her beauty routine was not personal vanity, but professional necessity. By the end of the medieval period, even relatively modest households might contain the basic implements of forehead modification: tweezers, small knives, containers of whitening compounds. These objects, recovered by archaeologists from sites across Europe, tell the story of millions of women who participated, in their own small ways, in the painful pursuit of an ideal that was never designed for people like them. The archaeological record reveals the wide distribution of these implements across social and geographical boundaries. A peasant cottage in rural England might contain the same basic tools as a merchant's house in Florence, though the quality and materials would differ dramatically. This uniformity suggests not just the influence of elite culture, but the development of specialized production and trade networks, dedicated to serving the beauty needs of all social classes. The emotional toll of these practices is harder to document, but emerges in fragments of personal testimony preserved in letters, diaries, and court records. A merchant's wife in Bruges writes to her sister about the shame she feels when her modified hairline grows out, revealing the true proportions of her forehead. A servant girl appears in court records accused of theft, having stolen cosmetic implements in a desperate attempt to improve her marriage prospects. A nun confesses to her spiritual advisor about the pride she takes in her naturally high forehead, struggling with the sin of vanity even within the religious life. As you rest in the comfort of your modern world, far removed from the daily struggles of these medieval women, you might reflect on the strange persistence of these patterns. The specific techniques have changed, the ideals have evolved, but the fundamental dynamic remains. The way that beauty standards created by the most privileged members of society filter down to become burdens for everyone else. The way that the pursuit of an impossible ideal becomes a form of social control shaping behavior and consciousness in ways that extend far beyond mere appearance. The medieval women who plucked their hairlines, who whitened their foreheads, who endured daily pain in pursuit of divine proportion, were not simply following fashion. They were navigating a complex system of social expectations, economic pressures, and cultural ideals that offered them few alternatives. Their transformed faces were both acts of compliance and forms of resistance, ways of claiming space in a world that offered them little power while acknowledging the constraints that limited their choices. In the end, the story of the medieval high forehead is not really about beauty at all. It is about power, about the ways that societies use ideals of physical perfection to create and maintain hierarchies, to reward conformity and punish deviation, to transform individual bodies into collective symbols. The women who participated in these rituals understood this, perhaps better than we do today. They knew that their foreheads were not merely personal features, but political statements, that their daily grooming was not merely self-care, but social survival. Their courage lay not in achieving the impossible ideal, but in finding ways to maintain their dignity and humanity, while navigating a system designed to reduce them to the sum of their physical features. In their quiet acts of compromise and resistance, in their creative solutions to impossible problems, in their daily choice to continue striving despite the pain, they left us a legacy that extends far beyond the strange fashion of the high forehead, to touch the very heart of what it means to be human in a world that often seems designed to diminish us. The legacy of these women lives on in the small gestures of defiance and adaptation that we can still observe in their material remains. The comb found in a servant's grave, carved with unusual care despite its humble materials. The mirror shard discovered in a peasant cottage, carefully polished and treasured despite its tiny size. The cosmetic pot from a merchant's house, decorated with personal symbols that speak of individual identity, preserved within collective conformity. Each of these objects tells a story of a woman who refused to be entirely defined by her circumstances, who found ways to participate in the larger culture of her time while maintaining something essentially her own. They remind us that even in the most constrained circumstances, human creativity and dignity find ways to express themselves, that beauty, however defined, remains a fundamental human aspiration that transcends class, wealth, and social position. Let their rhythm of daily transformation, the scraping and plucking, the whitening and powdering, the careful calibration of appearance to circumstance, become a gentle tide that carries you towards sleep, toward dreams of a world where beauty is not a burden, but a gift, where pain is not the price of acceptance, but the exception rather than the rule, where the face in the mirror reflects not the impossible standards of others, but the unique and irreplaceable truth of who you are. As our journey through the medieval world of beauty and pain draws to a close, we find ourselves back where we began, standing before a mirror contemplating the strange relationship between the face nature gave us and the one society demands we create. The medieval women whose stories we have followed, from the noble lady in her castle chamber to the baker's wife in her humble cottage, have all returned to dust, their high foreheads long since dissolved into the earth. Yet their legacy remains, written not in stone or parchment, but in the persistent human struggle to find identity and worth in a world that judges us by our appearance. The high forehead that once seemed so essential, so meaningful, so worth the daily price of pain now strikes us as merely curious, a historical footnote, a reminder of how arbitrary and changeable our ideals of beauty truly are. Yet the forces that created this strange fashion, the desire for acceptance, the fear of rejection, the hope that transformation might lead to a better life, these remain as powerful today as they were 6 centuries ago. In examining these medieval beauty practices, we uncover layers of meaning that extend far beyond the surface of plucked hairlines and whitened faces. Each morning, ritual of transformation was both an act of submission to societal expectations and a declaration of agency, a way for women to assert some measure of control over their presentation to the world, even when that control came at a considerable cost. The noble lady who spent an hour each dawn carefully removing every strand of hair from her natural hairline was not merely following fashion, she was participating in a complex dance of power, status, and identity that determined her place in the rigid hierarchy of medieval society. Consider the profound isolation these women must have felt as they performed their daily alterations in the privacy of their chambers. Without the benefit of our modern understanding of self-acceptance or body positivity, they had only the testimony of their mirrors and the approval or disapproval of others to guide them. The young bride learning to reshape her face for her new husband's family, the aging noblewoman desperately maintaining her transformed appearance to retain her position at court, the merchant's daughter hoping that the right forehead might secure her a more advantageous marriage, each faced the mirror alone, armed only with primitive tools and the fierce determination to become someone other than who nature had made them. The physical pain they endured was only one dimension of their suffering. There was also the psychological burden of never being quite enough in their natural form, the exhausting vigilance required to maintain their artificial improvements, and the constant fear that their true selves might somehow show through their carefully constructed facades. Yet within this suffering, we can also discern moments of genuine community and connection. The shared knowledge of beauty secrets passed from mother to daughter, the quiet conversations between ladies in waiting about the best methods for achieving the perfect forehead, the mutual understanding that existed among women who all bore the same burden of transformation. These created bonds that transcended the isolation imposed by their beauty practices. What strikes us most powerfully about these medieval women is not their willingness to endure pain for beauty, but their remarkable resilience in the face of impossible standards. They lived in a world where their worth was measured almost entirely by their ability to attract and please others, where their faces were considered public property to be judged and found wanting by anyone who looked upon them. In such circumstances, the decision to take up tweezers and begin the slow, painful process of reshaping oneself becomes not an act of vanity, but one of survival. The medieval understanding of beauty was inextricably linked to concepts of virtue, purity, and divine favor. A high forehead was not merely fashionable, it was thought to indicate intelligence, nobility of spirit, and moral superiority. By reshaping their faces, these women were attempting to reshape their very identities, to claim for themselves the respect and admiration that society reserved for those blessed with the proper features. In their daily rituals of transformation, we see the earliest expressions of ideas that continue to shape our world today. The belief that we can become better versions of ourselves, that appearance reflects character, that suffering in pursuit of improvement is not only acceptable but admirable. Yet we must also acknowledge the tragic futility that underlies these medieval beauty practices. No amount of plucking could truly transform a woman's social status. No degree of whitening could guarantee her happiness. No height of forehead could secure her permanent acceptance. The very arbitrariness of the high forehead ideal, its emergence from nowhere, its sudden popularity, its eventual disappearance, reveals the hollow nature of all such fashions. The women who devoted their lives to achieving it were chasing a phantom, pursuing a goal that promised everything and delivered very little. in the gentle space between waking and sleeping, as consciousness begins to fade and the busy concerns of the day release their hold on your mind. Let yourself imagine a different kind of mirror, one that reflects not the standards others have set for us, but the unique beauty that lies within each human soul. Let the rhythm of medieval beauty rituals, the daily scraping and plucking, the careful application of powders and pastes, become a lullaby that carries you toward rest, toward dreams of a world where worth is measured not by the height of our foreheads, but by the depth of our compassion, not by the pallor of our skin, but by the warmth of our hearts. The medieval women who shared their stories with us tonight understood something that we sometimes forget in our modern world, that beauty is not about perfection, but about the courage to continue striving, not about achieving an impossible ideal, but about finding dignity in the midst of struggle. Their transformed faces were not monuments to vanity, but testimonies to resilience, proof that the human spirit can maintain its grace even when the body is subjected to daily pain in service of others' expectations. These women were pioneers in their own way, early explorers of the complex relationship.